Cool. Okay, welcome everyone to the 2020 APAC Groundbreakers Virtual Tour by APAC OUZ. And this year, our event would be the biggest one ever done with 174 sessions, including normal sessions, workshops, and hands-on labs from 123 different speakers over 11 days. Also, it would cover sessions in 4 different languages, so please remember to register to as many sessions as you can, and all sessions would be available to replay as many times as you want for 2 weeks after the initial session date and time. You can also interact with a speaker at any time during the 2 weeks by posting questions or comments directly in the playback session page. Now I would like to say thanks to all Oracle user groups and Java user groups that made this event possible, and also to our sponsors, Oracle Groundbreakers and CloudDB. Now for today's session, what I have learned from SaaS customers, high and lows by Deborah Lilly. Please feel free to write questions at any time during the session at the Q&A tab of the Zoom webinar, and the speaker will be answering them at the end of the session. If any issues during the presentation, please feel free to contact me at any time on the chat tab of the Zoom webinar. Now, without any more delays, I would like to leave you with this amazing session by Deborah. Take it away, Deborah.
Thank you. I just share my screen for you.
Cool.
Hopefully people can
I can
see my scene. Brilliant. Okay then, so let's start. Okay, so well, I should say good evening for most of you. For me, it's very early in the morning. But my name's Deborah Lilly, and I work for Accenture, and I'm an Oracle ACE Director, of which I'm very proud. I think on this slide, it says that I've worked with Oracle apps since 1996, which makes me pretty old. My first release of eBusiness Suite was 941, which is an awfully long time ago. But I've always been involved in user groups, and I had the privilege when Oracle first talked about writing Fusion apps, which is now the mainstay of their software as a service. When they first talked about writing this, they said that they would love to have user group input, but the 450 user groups around the world was too many for them to engage with. So we got together and we created what was called the Product Development Council, and we worked with Oracle, giving user group feedback into development. And that was an amazing opportunity, both as an individual, but also for my career. And it's exactly what led to me becoming a Fusion advocate and then an Oracle ACE Director. So I said, I'm proud to be an Oracle ACE Director, and I know that a lot of speakers on this tour are part of the ACE program. And the program is all about being knowledgeable, not necessarily the most knowledgeable, but being knowledgeable and prepared to share that knowledge with your community. And that's why I love to give these presentations. And normally when we're in the same room, part of the motivation for doing it is because I will learn from you. And this whole presentation is about projects that either I've been directly part of or stories that I've heard as I've shared my stories. And, you know, I come away from each presentation having learned something from the audience. So I do a lot of this thought leadership. I do a lot of proof of concepts with Oracle, taking new technologies and seeing how that's going to work in the apps world, because there is a gap between the technology being available from Oracle and it making its way into the apps world. Nowhere near as long as that gap used to be, but that's my sweet spot, is that new stuff. So I write for Oracle Magazine and Profit Magazine. I've done a number of webcasts with Oracle, HCM Talk Radio, and I write white papers in my job in Accenture. So I really love working with a product that's constantly changing. So I'm going to start my presentation by saying this presentation was almost I don't know, almost a dare. So about a year ago, someone wrote a blog, one of my Follow Ace directors wrote a blog about how to get a good presentation. And I have to caveat this by saying that 99% of Oracle Ace directors are very technical, and I'm completely the other side. I understand the technology, but I'm not a practitioner. And in his blog, he said, a good presentation shouldn't be formulaic. It shouldn't, shouldn't have 1, 2, 3 points or whatever. And I challenged that, and I said, nope, I'm going to do mine all C's. Just a bit of fun, really. And I wanted for a long time to talk about, yes, I'm always putting stories into my presentations because I think that's how people relate more to what's going on. And I wanted to do a presentation that was all stories, and picking a letter and working out which stories to tell, I thought made sense. So I thought I'd go with the C's. So I start off with the customers themselves, and they're unique. All customers are unique. And that means that you really have to understand the business, and that's not just for me as a systems integrator. That's them themselves. Everybody in every organization should be able to understand what is core to their business, what is the strategy for their business. And I work mainly in HCM now with people systems, although I started in the financial side. But it means about understanding your people strategy as much as what does your business do. And we talk about the projects being around transforming, a digital platform for your business. All of those what now sound like cliches, perhaps, because I think we're all beyond that now. We all understand the value of digital. But all of those things that you do, it's about transforming what your business is going to do. So that's what I love. I love getting to know an organization and understanding exactly what it is that they do. And I'm a generalist. I've worked in lots of different industries, and I love that whilst it's very, very important to have strong industry knowledge, it's also good to have people who've got a wider outlook, because sometimes what's a problem in one industry might affect another organization, and you're not obviously aware that it happens in that industry as well. So I've worked on in the early days of the applications. There was some what I would call smaller organizations who, for the first time, organizations who themselves had grown out of the last economic crisis. So companies who had developed quickly and had gone from being not much more than startups to being quite important organizations. And the change to cloud gave them that opportunity to invest in tier one applications that they wouldn't possibly have been able to do previously. And so taking those organizations on their journey was incredibly interesting. I remember one of the first that I worked with end to end was a telecoms company who had a monopoly. In their geography, they'd had a monopoly, and that monopoly was being opened up to competition. And they had, in the start, they had been state funded, and that was going away as well. So what a complete transformation for that organization and their staff and everything. And it was great to see, how could we help them take their organization the way that they needed to do. It was really, really interesting, but they were very clear about their purpose and where they were going. And then I worked with another organization that had its roots in in being a volunteer organization. And, you know, they were now going to be completely privatized with large amounts of money in their organization, which previously they, you know, they hadn't done. It was a, you know, a completely different business model. And to take them from what was not much more than automated spreadsheets in some areas, and take them to being a, you know, fit for their future, again, was very, very interesting. And they had some very different legal entities or legal standings, which I had never come across before. It was really, really interesting to make that change. And then another one that I've seen a few times actually are organizations that don't need to necessarily transform today, but they need to be able to keep on transforming. Organizations that are very acquisition hungry, where that growth is phenomenal, and they keep on bringing more and more external organizations in, or organizations that have to be incredibly agile, where they spin off a new legal entity for each of their projects, or and you know that those are, they have to need the framework that's going to allow them to be that agile. And so again, that is something else that I love, is that being able to change the way that an organization uses its systems, because it's not about changing the organization to fit the system, it's about the system supporting them. And you can only do that when you really understand what it is that the customers are trying to achieve. So I suppose the next one is caution. So the early adopters started around 2013. And at the time, people said, "Oh, this is just release 13 of eBusiness Suite. You know, I've got 20 years experience in eBusiness Suite. I'll be great at Fusion, etc." And I would say that, you know, this isn't release 13. In that year, when people were early adopters, it was probably pretty close from a database point of view, and from some of the structural points, like how it dealt with roles and responsibilities, etc. But only if on that date you were on the latest version, the latest patch of eBusiness Suite 12. Only on that day was it not too far away, because Oracle had completely rewritten the applications. They may have used some of the processes, they may have used the database model, but they were using completely different technology to do it. So the user interface was different. And they were then developing that code separately to the continuous development of eBusiness Suite under the Apps Unlimited banner. So as we've gone on, and we're now, you know, 10 years since early adopters, 7, 8 years since general availability, it's completely different, completely different. And it's and I find that quite worrying when people say, well, I have 20 years experience in eBusiness Suite, I'll be able to cut over. If you're functional, then you've got some great skills that can move over. If you're apps technical, then you will be able to do it, but you have to be open-minded and understand that it is different. I remember one project turning up on day one, and I thought the customer had understood that it was going to be completely different. And they said, "Oh, here's our new project manager," and they brought in a contractor as a project manager. And he said, "Oh, you know, I've 25 years experience in the eBusiness Suite, whatever. Absolutely, I've 25 years experience of this." And I said, "Yeah, but not of this product." And he says, "No, I have 25 years experience, it will be fine." And then he got out his methodology booklet and said, "Okay, then let's start with these forms." And I said, "No, we don't do it like that. We just don't do it like that. And that was quite scary. And unfortunately, I see less and less of that as people go on and there's more experience in the market. But I have seen some stalling in projects where there has been too much, well, this is how we used to do it. It isn't the same as those upgrades. Culture. I think I probably should have put culture first. Again, it's less of an issue because I think we're more used to cloud applications in general. But with a cloud application, the whole concept is completely different. You need to come at it with a completely different view. When you start a project, it's not about sitting in a room for 2 months drawing out processes on a whiteboard and capturing the way that you do things now and everything like that. The system has its processes and you're going to adopt them, and we'll come to that later, but it's a whole different approach. You also have to understand that the application is going to be constantly changing. This isn't about one big upgrade and then we'll sit back and wait a few years till we do the next one. This is going to be constantly coming at you. You're in a state of learning all the time and absorbing new things that are coming along the line, and it is going to be different for your organization. And I think I say to people, we're sitting in the room and we're going, what are the principles for our project? What is the key comments that we're going to keep coming back to? And one of them that I say is that, we're going to ban the, we always done it this way. We're going to ban that from the room because we've it's a big investment and we need to make those changes. And those changes are there are some big changes from how we used to do things. So the roles and the access and the security of our data and the security of development has changed, and we need to understand those, and they're for the better. They make it so much easier for us. So we don't have, in the old e-business suite, we had responsibilities, and somebody could have multiple responsibilities, and that meant that if you were, if you had HR rules because you were a manager, but you were in finance, you would have 2 separate responsibilities, and each one of those would be secured differently. Well, now you have a role, and that role will allow you to do both, and you can still have separate security on them, but it's around understanding how that fits together, and how the system is handles that is actually far more powerful. And the reason for that is we were seeing lots of people who were creating shared services, creating systems that looked after multiple either organizations themselves or different parts, very different parts of an organization. And that shared service concept was quite, there were challenges around how the people who were looking after all of those different organizations, how they moved from one to another. And because the responsibilities were striped across the application, then if you needed to report across multiple ones, then that became more complex as well. Well, that's much, much easier in the SaaS application, and the development of what you can do in a shared service has just come so much further. And I've worked on a number of those, and they're very, very powerful. And what can be done, especially if you bring help desk technology, and there's several different variations of that in SaaS, but if you bring that in, there is so much more that you can do with the applications. And I think we had this in the previous, well, we had it in eBusiness Suite. It wasn't the same in PeopleSoft, but this idea that the SaaS application is all one code base. And it is, and that's great for a shared service, but there are some things that are different. And I think about when we're designing an enterprise system, so where you've got both finance and HCM, those organizations, those parts of the organization may look at the organization differently. So one of the big challenges around doing an integrated, well, it's not integrated because it is one system, but if you're using both ERP and HCM, one really important thing to do is to make sure that when you do your design, you do your design together, that both sides of the organization sit in a room together and agree the principles of how they look at their organization. So the hierarchies that they use, the coding structure that they use, because there are concepts that can be used for different things in different modules, and if you don't get that right, then one side or the other is going to be compromised down the line. And that's especially true if you do a project where one side of the organization goes first. So either you put finance in first or you put HCM in first. And one trick I've used a few times where an organization wants to put HCM in, that they see that they're going to get a quick return on that investment. I sit with them and I say, are you expecting to do finance in the future? And if there's any thoughts that they might want to add finance in the future, then consider the buying the minimum use license of finance. It's not a very big additional cost, but then I would put in a very light general ledger, basically just your chart of accounts and your hierarchies, which are far more flexible in the SaaS application. But just putting in that rigor and structure around how your organization looks will ensure that if you bring finance in at any stage in the future, then those building blocks are there. And it's very, very powerful. And I have seen on 2 occasions where that has actually accelerated the move to finance, because they've seen how it looks, they've seen we've put some data in the test system for them, they've seen how the reporting works, and then they've thought, actually, I can see my data in this. I'd like to get to the stage where I do all of my finance in this. And in 2 projects, I've seen finance be accelerated because of that. Challenge. So I mentioned that we're about adopting best practice, and challenge is a big part of what we do. So Oracle has invested millions in understanding how their customers do things. I said that as user groups, we were involved. The user group that I was part of, UK OUG, we actually wrote white papers as to which product processes we thought worked best. So we had mixed groups for each of the modules, and we said, so for this particular process in finance, do we think that PeopleSoft, JD Edwards, eBusiness Suite, which one do we think is the better one? I remember even saying that one process didn't work properly wasn't ideal in all 3 of them, and could we start again? And Oracle listened, but they also went around lots and lots of individual organizations and watched the way that they work, and they've come up with best practices in their processes, because we can't change those processes. We can change parameters to a process. So if you think about, a lot of processing is around approvals, and we can configure those approvals, how many levels, who's in the approvals tree, what happens if someone's not there, what happens if it fails, etc. But that's configuration. What we can't do is write completely new processes. Now, we can extend the system, and that's not what this presentation is about, but we can extend the system by writing something outside and bringing them together. But the challenge at the beginning is, if this best practice doesn't work for you, why doesn't it work? And that's what happens. Your systems integrator will build it from understanding what you do, from their understanding of your business, and then you'll get a prototype, and then it will be going through those processes. And if something doesn't work, then, or if something doesn't work for you, then challenge why. And I had one organization, and their principle printed on the wall of their project room was, it has to do everything that our old system did, but not necessarily in the same way. They weren't in that we've always done it this way mode. And it was very successful as a project. And be prepared for that challenge. And then, and if you can articulate a real reason why it doesn't work for you, then we can look at how to extend it. And I'll give an example of an organization. Well, actually, we'll come on to customization in a minute. But if the challenge, if you meet that, if you can challenge and say, no, that process doesn't work for us, because what makes our organization different is we do this. And if it's a valid challenge, and we can't configure the system to do that challenge, then we can extend it. And hopefully those discussions happen way before you're in the project itself, but that challenge of those best practice processes. So you cannot customize. Okay, we cannot open the lid of the box, go in, change something in the database, change a standard process, etc., etc., and it's locked down. However, we can extend it, so we can develop something that we then run alongside and call from the application. As I say, the extending SaaS is a completely different presentation, but it's very straightforward to do. If you need something to extend, then we can do that. And what we do is we write it as a separate application, run it in a coexistence mode, and the application allows for us to punch out to that extension and come back. Keep on saying it's a completely different presentation. Tell the organizers if you want to have that presentation. But there are times when it's necessary. And I worked on a project where the organization had a very big workforce, and but they liked their managers to have some autonomy in how that workforce worked. They used workforce planning, which is part of the EPM suite, and they use that to model different scenarios and work out what their headcount budget was. So not just using it for financial modeling, but for headcount modeling as well. And you can feed that information straight back into the SaaS system, which will then tell you what vacancies that you have or what gaps you have in your workforce compared to the budget that you need. But this organization wanted their managers to be able to model that headcount. So how are they going to use that? So if you told a manager he could have 2 more people, then he could determine what those 2 people were going to do so that he had that autonomy for his team. Now, the system didn't allow him to do that modeling. And more than that, the organization needed to, they wanted that autonomy, but they then wanted to approve that modeling before they became official vacancies. So we built a little bit that allowed them to do that. A little extension that took the data from both the budgeting and the actuals from the SaaS system, gave them a workbench where they could model what they were going to use it for, and then put that through an approvals process. And once approved, then that was fed back into the SaaS system. So it was just an extra step that they as an organization needed. it was an extension of the best practice. It wasn't that the best practice didn't work for them, it's just they needed to do a little bit more. And their end users would not be able to see that there was a difference in that, that the bit that they punched out to was actually a different application. I think this is probably the most overused term, but actually key to what happens in SaaS: continuous innovation. I think when we're in the sales cycle, oh, you're buying into cloud, there's continuous innovation. You're always going to be up to date. You're not going to do an upgrade, wait 5 years, and then the application has more functionality, but you might not have taken that upgrade yet. That sounds great during the sales process. The reality is it's a completely different way of life. It really is. There's always something new. Now, we have an update every 3 months. People worry about, oh my God, we've got to go through an upgrade every 3 months. It's not like an upgrade. And I will talk about that on the next slide, about why it's not quite the same as an old-fashioned upgrade. But what it does mean is that there's always new functionality coming, and when something is when there's a new technology around, or there's changes in the world that we live in, then they can react to it so much quicker. So a couple of years ago, they introduced mobile responsiveness. And what that meant was you didn't need a separate application to be able to use this on a phone or a tablet. The browser would work on whatever device you were on, and it would fit its form to match that device. And we were working with one organization who were rolling out HCM to their very mobile workforce. And they loved the fact that this was coming, and in fact became an early adopter so that they could roll that out to their workforce as quickly as possible. And once customers have been live for a while and they get used to this continuous innovation, we see a lot more people ready to go first. There are benefits for them. They can work with development. They have their hands held. They get an awful lot of attention. But it also means that, if they're able to consume it, they can take what's valuable to their organization very, very quickly. So it's a culture change, very much a culture change, but actually it's a great way to be able to pick up on what's coming very, very quickly. I Another organization that I work with, Digital Assistant, they loved that functionality. They had a help desk, and they were able to very, very quickly take the information that was in the knowledge repository of that help desk into like a frequently asked question chatbot. Very, very easy to do, and made such a big difference to the service that they were giving to their customers. So that continuous innovation, being able to pick that up so quickly, becomes part and parcel. So we have a common code base. Everybody is on the same, and it's, people worry about, oh, is the update every 3 months going to be like an upgrade? And I think the way I explain it is, if I think back to my eBusiness Suite days, and I ran support for a lot of organizations when I was at Fujitsu for a long time, and every time you raised a problem, every time a ticket had to be raised, there was this form to fill in. Now Oracle can harvest the information themselves, but what machine are you on, what server you're on, what version of the database, what operating system, what version of the application, go into your form and tell me the form number. And it was that interoperability, that combination of factors that probably meant that nobody had seen your problem before. It was a combination of factors. Now in SaaS, where Oracle are providing the system and it's running in their data centers, everybody is on the same hardware. Everybody is on the same operating system. Everybody is on the same version of the middleware. Everybody is on the same. There's only ever 2 versions of the application because there's a 3-month rolling cycle. And so you're either on the latest or the one before, but over a 3-month period, you're all on the same. So if a problem is found, and it's going to be found much more quickly in Oracle's testing because they've got every combination there, because there's only one combination, then if a problem is hit, it's going to hit more people because everybody's on the same, but it also means that it's much easier to fix. And that does reduce the number of issues between going from one version to another. It doesn't mean there are no issues, but in my experience, and I've now been doing this for about 7 years with production customers, not the level of issues that we've had previously. And it's a very tight turnaround, but it is much easier than it has been. Another really good thing about being on a common code base is that you can share. So Oracle has Customer Connect, which is its online forum. I'm going to talk about that probably on the next slide. But it also means that if you want to write a report about something, you can share that with other people. You can also have the ability to share these stories with other people. And I think that probably takes us on to Customer Connect, which is the community side of it. And 2 examples of that actual sharing. When COVID happened, their organizations needed a different insight on their workforce, like how many of their employees might be at risk, how many were of a certain age, and how many had disabilities that might mean that they needed to shield or whatever. And Oracle wrote some reports for that, and we're able to share it on Customer Connect within days. You didn't even have to wait for the next update that might be 3 months away. They were able to share that straight away, and then customer organizations who were also writing things for themselves, they were going out there and sharing them. Customer Connect also has been a big step forward in enhancement requests. So because everybody is using the same base code, enhancements are able to come at a much faster pace. And Oracle encourage people to raise their enhancement requests on Customer Connect, and then other organizations can vote for them, so Oracle can see what priority to put on them. And a user group volunteer in the UK, he needed an enhancement request around some government reporting, a public sector organization. And so he put his enhancement request on the Customer Connect, and then he reached out through the user group, through other community groups that he was in his industry, and said, hey, we need this. The enhancement request is out there, go and vote for it. And they did. And then that came into, not necessarily the next release, but it came quite quickly. And so that value in being part of a community, and this is an online user group for SaaS users. It does offer an awful lot of information. It's where you find out about what's coming in the next release, etc., etc. But also, I think if you're a user group leader, Customer Connect is not competition. It's actually a way to find out what your end users want to hear about. go in and have a look at the conversations and say, hey, why don't we get a couple more people to come in and have that conversation with our user community? Would make, I think it's a great opportunity to see what people want. Yeah, I've said that. Okay, and community, I've just talked about that. If when Oracle bring in new innovation, it's not switched on, it's there for you to switch on. So people aren't necessarily consuming that continuous innovation at the same pace. So if you want to look at the responsive UI, or well, we're all on that now, but if you want to look at digital assistants, reach out to your community and say, hey, who else has done this? What did you learn? What were the learnings from doing that? So being part of a user group is really important. So what does that mean to me, right? So, because it's changing so much, the certification process has changed. Implementers have to do, there's a new exam every year. And if our exam was taken more than 18 months ago, it's no longer valid. Because of that continuous innovation. So it's become very, very hard work, but fun. I think it's fun. But I want to end on my last C, which is celebrate. Right? We talk about challenges. We talk about. I had one customer who wrote an article in a user group magazine, and they said yes, they had challenges in their implementation, but they looked at them as speed bumps rather than showstoppers. And but what was really important to them, and I find this is definitely my mantra, is when you finished, stop and look back at what you've achieved. Not just celebrate the fact that the project is over, because every IT project is challenging, but celebrate what you've actually achieved. Celebrate the change that's made to your organization, and celebrate the fact that when you need new changes in your organization, it's not going to be the pain that it used to be in the past, that you have set yourself up for the future, and that you can consume this new innovation when it makes sense for your organization. And I actually celebrate every day this product, because it has given me all of the things that I loved about working in applications, but it's giving it to me and to the customers that I work with much faster, which in itself is a challenge, much faster, but keeps us on our toes and allows us to learn something new every day, which is what motivates me. So I hope that you celebrate what you've done, and I hope that some of these stories have made it more real for you if you haven't done it yet. So I don't think I've got any questions, but I think you're able to ask questions on the replay if necessary. So I think that with that, I'd just like to say thank you. If there are any questions, I'll be here for another minute or so. But if you want to reach out to me, then I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn. I have a blog spot. I'm just about to publish a blog on life behind a screen. Some of the challenges that I've personally faced with doing this, everything remotely. I'd much rather be in Asia Pacific now. A little bit of warmth would be nice. It's winter where I am now. And like I said at the beginning, I feed off the energy of an audience. So I find this quite difficult to be doing everything as a webcast. But I hope that that's been of value to you. And I hope if you're listening to this as a recording, then the fact that it was recorded has given you another opportunity to participate and get some of those learnings. So with that, I'd like to say thank you and have a good evening.
Cool. Thank you, Deborah, for sharing your experiences with everyone else. If our participants have some questions, yes, I guess we can still find time for some questions. Yeah, I guess there's no more question. Once again, thank you, Deborah. And for all our participants, thank you for attending this session. And yes, you still have time to register to the sessions for tomorrow. So tomorrow is going to be the last day. So feel free to register to all the sessions that's going to happen tomorrow. And thank you for being here and have a good day.